Scientology is a controversial practice that some people believe is brainwashing, while other people believe that it has helped them in many ways. We've been asked many times on our channel, what is Scientology counseling, otherwise known as auditing? Well, we've got somebody here that we're going to interview, and he's going to explain to you what is Scientology auditing and how does it work. And his name is Trey Lotz. He has been auditing in Scientology for over 50 years, and he's no longer associated with the Church of Scientology. He audits people and processes people counseling outside on his own, away from the Church of Scientology, because of the abuses involved in that actual organized church. But he's going to be able to explain to you how it works, how the e-meter works. He's audited hundreds and hundreds of people, and we're going to let him tell his story about Scientology and how he delivers it to try and help people. Stick around, enjoy the video. Welcome everybody to our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher, and I'm here with my co-host, Janice Gillum Grady. And Janice, we've got a special show today, don't we? We've got somebody really that we've been interested in interviewing for a while, right?
Yes, we do. But first, let me say good day to everybody. Good day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we do. We have a very interesting person that we're interviewing today. And he's actually also going to explain some things so that people who don't know what auditing is or what the e-meter is that's used in auditing, we're going to ask him to explain that so people get a better understanding of what Scientology is, and also why is he still practicing Scientology.
That's right. And he is a highly trained Scientology counselor, auditor, and he's been doing it for over 50 years, I think he mentioned to us. And so we're gonna let him tell his story, and also, like Janice said, explain to people who have never been in about how auditing works, how counseling works. So Janice, why don't you go ahead? You can introduce our guest.
So I've known this guest, actually. He was on the ship in 1975 doing an auditor internship directly under L. Ron Hubbard, who was, CSing the auditor trainees at that time. And then over the years, I've been in touch with him, or I'd hear his name, and he's come up to Las Vegas several times for events. And, we know a lot of the same people as well. So let me bring on Trey Lotz.
Hey, Trey, how you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Trey, I think you're probably the number one independent Scientology auditor in the world. I don't think anyone else does it as much as you, or is known as much as you're known.
Yeah, there's a few others, but we're pretty small group.
Okay.
How long have you been auditing, and you're still doing it to this day? How long have you been doing it?
I did my first session in 1969 in a mission in Buffalo. I grew up outside of Buffalo and went to that mission there.
Got it.
So that's 55 years.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go over your history and that type of thing of how you got in Scientology and all that. But tell everybody what training you've done and what services do you deliver as a field auditor. You're located in California, right?
Yeah, Los Angeles. I've lived in the same house here for 52 years.
Wow. And you have no shortage of pre-class or PCs, because
no, it's very interesting how that developed. I can tell you about that a little bit more later.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay.
Go right ahead. We want to talk about your business and what you're doing these days and how you deliver your auditing and stuff.
Oh, sure. Well, I came to Los Angeles, and I got in Scientology in 1969, and as I said, in Amherst, New York, where I grew up. And I went to New York, Oregon, got my lower level training. And when I was in the New York, Oregon, I saw a little poster on the bulletin board said auditors wanted in Hawaii, guaranteed $25 a week. So I thought, that sounded pretty good. So,
A week.
yeah. Well, they broke that agreement after about 2 weeks, but never mind that. So I went to Hawaii.
You got to go to the beach.
Yeah. Yeah, I slept on a mat and right in Waikiki Beach, so it was really great. Anyway, so I went to this org, and I had done the courses in New York, but there was no internships at the time. So the only way I was going to get any practice auditing was to audit in an org. So I went to the Scientology org there, and I just audited for about 3 months full time. I came to Los Angeles in 1969. I did the briefing course at ASHO. Interestingly enough, one of the very first people I met in Los Angeles was your mom, Janice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it was the second night I was here. Somebody took me over to Celebrity Center, and she greeted me, and Lamont Johnson was there, I remember.
Okay,
and
yep.
She was so warm and so personable. I just really, when people first get introduced to Scientology, you give them data and so on. But, really they're looking at you and they're thinking, I wonder if I want to be like this guy. Yeah. So I looked at your mom. I'd like to be like her. She was she's one in a million. And I just really saw her theta. And I just really loved spending time over there. And since there were so few people in Scientology at the time, I did get a lot of time to talk with her. And it was very nice. So anyway, I did my briefing course, and then I audited for a while. I volunteer audited at ASHO and AO because you could do it at that time. They let the public do that. And then I did my Class 8 course at the AO over on Westlake Boulevard, right near Celebrity Center and LA Org. It was an old house, and we lived right across the street from it, so it was pretty easy. And started auditing. I didn't plan on being a field auditor. I was in my apartment at the Westlake Lanai. It's like an old motel that they rented out. Mm-hmm. And this guy I knew, Freddie, banged on my door and said, "Can you audit my girlfriend, please?" And he sounded pretty desperate. So I said, okay, and at that time you could audit on credit. Auditing was like $25 an hour. So right. He said, "Look, I'll tell you what, we'll pay you $25 a week and just do as much auditing as you can on her." I said, sounds okay to me. And then they knew somebody. And then eventually I had like 3 people, and they were all paying me $25 a week. And my rent was like $50 a month. So this was a pretty good deal. I didn't have a car. I walked everywhere, took a bus. And it just started from there. Originally, I'd planned to go back. I'd been a professional musician for 6 years. So originally I planned on going back, getting the band started again, and really, because that's what helped get me in Scientology was this idea I'd become more creative and, be able to be better at what I was doing. Anyway,
so that's a picture of you, right?
What?
That's a picture of you in the band days?
Yeah, I'm on the left. My brother's on the right. He was the handsome guy. I was the lead guitar player. And on the drums is our buddy from high school. So we played together for about 6 years with different people filling in on keyboard and bass. Made some records.
What kind of music did you play?
We played what was popular at the time, Rolling Stones, played a lot of rhythm and blues, Albert King, the Beau Brummels, the Kinks, Beatles, whatever. The hit record, we liked it. We'd learn how to play it, and we'd play. We played college concerts on weekends, and I was going
to New York. Is this in Buffalo? Is this in New York?
I went to Hamilton College right outside of Utica, and my my brother and my buddy moved to Utica so we could play together.
Where
And we
is
got-
Utica?
Huh?
Where is Utica?
Utica is central New York. It's about 30 miles away from Syracuse.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we played, we got an agent. We traveled all around New York State, like Union, RPI, Colgate, Syracuse, Cornell, playing weekends, like at fraternity houses. And then I'd go back and I'd do college. I was a philosophy and religion major. So at the time, all my seminars were in the afternoon, so I could be a musician and play till 2 a.m. and still make my classes. So it worked out pretty well.
Now, is that when you discovered Scientology? Was that when you were in college? Like, did you read a book or what happened?
Well, just to go back a little further, because it's kind of interesting how this all evolved, and looking back at it, it makes more sense than it made at the time. But I grew up in a middle-class family, as someone once said.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a very stable home life. I had a brother and a sister, and my grandparents lived in the same house with us. That's why they call me Trey, because I'm Albert III. My grandfather, father, and I were all Alberts, but we were in the same house. They called me Trey. And
so where did Trey come from?
Well, it means 3.
Trey means 3.
Oh, Trey. Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, Trey is 3.
Okay. Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, my grandfather, he was a big influence, because I used to go up and they taught me how to play cards and Nana and Pop, and and he was an inventor and an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And he and my grandmother had started the Spiritualist Church in Buffalo back in the 1920s. And they were spiritualists. Buffalo and Amherst, that area, Western New York, was the birthplace of spiritualism.
Isn't that also where like Joseph Smith and the Mormon Church all began from there? Yes,
it was a real hotbed of religious activities, and the Millerites were there. They go back to the 1850s. A lot of activity in that area. So anyway, my grandparents used to tell me all of these stories about mediums and trance meditation. My grandfather, he would meditate every morning and communicate with all the great inventors, and he ended up with about 30 different patents, and he had this little business in his basement. So he hired me to work in his basement, and when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and put together things, that was really fun. So I had this grounding in the spiritual universe and how it worked. And I have to say, it wasn't very real to me, but I thought the stories were pretty fascinating. And growing up, then I was always very interested in people and what made them tick. So I read a lot. I was a voracious reader. I read a lot about psychoanalysis, depth psychology, philosophy. I went into college with the idea of being a doctor, but unfortunately, they put me in an advanced biochemistry class in my first year. And because I'd taken advanced chemistry in high school, however, it was way over my head. So I really, I dropped out before I could flunk. And at the same time, I was taking a course in philosophy, and I loved it. And I got a 98 in that. So I said, I'm going to be a philosophy and religion major. And the main the head of the philosophy department, Dr. Blackwood, he was one of the top experts in Eastern religions. And at the time, he was one of the few people in the West that had ever interviewed the Dalai Lama, because at that time he was still in Tibet.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a lot of grounding in Buddhism, and that appealed to me a lot. I really liked that. And there was, of course, the idea of past lives and reincarnation. And I remember thinking at the time, I don't know about past lives. Maybe I've lived before, but I hope I never killed anybody.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah. So after I graduated from college, I stayed in Utica with my band, and we played full time. And one of our guys that came to see us had disappeared for a while, and he came back, and he'd gone to New York and done a communication course. So he gave me this book. I think there was the Evolution of a Science.
Yeah.
And I thought,
Dynamics Evolution of a Science.
Yeah, I read it. I'd just been studying philosophy and religion for 4 years, so I was used to reading philosophy.
Right.
I was pretty literate at the time, so I was thinking, I was impressed. I didn't think I would think that much of it, but I did. And so next time I was in Buffalo, I went to the mission there, and I bought all 6 basic books. Went back to my house trailer in Utica that I was living in, and we had a week we weren't playing, so I sat down and read all 6 books from cover to cover, and I have to say I was extremely impressed with Hubbard as a philosopher. I read the Phoenix Lectures, which to me was the highlight of the whole thing, reading about the axioms, and I thought to myself, this guy has solved the problem of Western philosophy, which is, how do you get something out of nothing? Now, there's only 2 schools of thought that have ever existed. And this is very interesting. This is one of the realizations I had in studying philosophy. Either you come from the premise that life created the physical world, or you come from the premise of the physical world created life. Those are the only, and everything else derives from that. One side is religion, and the other side is science and materialism. One of the people I studied in college was Henry Bergson, who he was the guy that coined the Elan Vital idea, which LRH talks about in Science of Survival. So I was reading that in Science of Survival. I said, that's impressive. He liked Henry Bergson, which is hardly anybody ever knows who Henry Bergson is, but he was writing against the materialists that were popular at the time. And so anyway, I read this book. I read all the books, and as I was reading the Dynamics book, I could feel somatics turn on and off. And again, I was very impressed because in college, if I had a couple of good cognitions every semester, I was pretty happy. And when I was reading those books, every couple of hours I'd have a good cognition, because he nailed things that I knew about and I thought were true, but right next to it, he gave me right next to it, he gave me another concept that expanded my awareness, and I could think, oh, wow, that makes sense too. Now, a lot of
Trey, I just wanted to interrupt you briefly. Somatics for people who have never been in, or like pains, like a pain in your head or like a tightness in your chest or whatever. That's what somatics are that he's talking about. And then cognition is like a new realization, like something like, oh my God, it's like an oh my God moment. Just wanted to let people know it, because sometimes we talk in Scientology terms, and I just wanted to explain it to them. Go ahead, Trey.
Sure. Yeah, I feel a pain turn on my knee, and then I get a picture of when I was a little kid, fell down and hit my knee. I go, this stuff is real. Although some of it was way over my head, some of the books, I never discounted it, but I thought, well, maybe it's something I could grow into, I couldn't say that I understood it really. So then after about a year of playing full time, the band, we all got interested in Scientology. We moved back to Buffalo, and then the band kind of fell apart, and I started doing my training. So then I did my training at the mission. I did my study course. I did some basic courses, and I did my first sessions. And
Was that the Buffalo mission
yeah,
with
and I
the
learned
Imburgers?
exactly, and I learned something very important. Because the mission was run by John Imburgia and Pete Imburgia. John Imburgia, a remarkable guy. He was the second clear, and he was very OT. He was a class 8, and he would give lectures every Friday. And on Friday afternoon, he would walk into the lecture room. He'd look around. He said, "Get 14 chairs out, because that's how many people are coming." And the staff would go, they get 14 chairs, and sure enough, 14 people would show up. and he'd see people studying, and he'd go over and he'd go back and said, "No, look up that word there." And I asked him, "How did you know that?" And he said, "Well, they left a little mass on it." Oh, that's pretty cool. That's pretty perceptive. And then his brother was Pete Imburgia. Well, to be kind, Pete was a real pain in the ass, and very arbitrary. I don't know. He just rubbed people the wrong way, as opposed to John, who was just terrific. You always wanted to be in his space. Pete, you wanted to avoid him, really.
But Dennis, is this the same? Is this the same mission where Holly Carlson?
Yes.
Holly
yes,
was
is.
that?
Yeah. She was a good friend of mine. She dated my brother for a while too, so we were pretty close. And but it taught me an important point, because I'd read all the books prior to ever getting involved. I knew the difference between Scientology and Scientologists. And that was important, because as you go along the line, as I went to LA and started doing my training, people asked me about this. I said, of the 10 best people I've ever met in my life, 7 or 8 have been Scientologists. And of the 10 biggest assholes I've ever met in my life, 4 or 5 of them have been Scientologists. you can't, because everybody's a work in progress. So
yeah.
The only thing we all have in common is we're interested in Scientology, and we're trying to get better. That's really the only thing. Other than that, you may or may not have anything else in common with anybody. So
Right.
You can't go by, well, what is this guy like? And gee, if I was clear, I'd be like this guy. Or it just doesn't work that way. When you go up the bridge and you get clear and you do your upper levels, as LRA says, you just become the best version of yourself. You're never somebody different that you don't know about and never heard of.
Well, let's talk about that, going up the bridge and auditing, and what that is all about, so that our viewers can have an understanding of where you as a auditor come from in helping people improve themselves.
Yeah, thank you. Well, just to pick up the story from the point where Freddie knocked on my door and asked me to audit his girlfriend, gradually I started to get more people who wanted me to audit them, and I had my little apartment that I was in. I had a card table and a meter, and that's what I had. I was married at the time to Dee, and she was doing training and working, and so I'd be home during the day and I'd audit people. And I started noticing I always felt really good after I was if I did a good session on somebody, I'd feel great. I mean, they'd feel great, but I'd feel great too. So
I was going to ask you about that. Like, what was it like after your first session? Did you actually audit somebody first, or did you receive auditing, or how did that go?
Well, when I was at the mission in Buffalo, I bought the grades, or the triple grades at the time, 3 flows. And I remember where it really came home to me is I was running a process. The auditor was auditing me, recall losing something. So I recall something and then recall losing something. I recall something else. I had my eyes closed. And then he asked, he said, recall losing something. And I went silent. And He said, there, what was that? What was it? I said, I just got a picture of, the last time I died. And I still get a little bit emotional when I talk about it because that was such a turning point for me. I mean, in one instant, the whole subject of past lives became real to me because nobody had to tell me it was real. Yeah, I could feel the whole thing.
Okay.
I died in a car accident. So anyway, that was my first auditing. I did the grades, and then I did it's called the HQS course. And the very first session I did was a self-analysis book, and it was it actually encouraged me to become an auditor because I set up the table, I had my meter, and I had these 2 pens, and I had a brand new person who'd never had any auditing. I was going to run self-analysis on them, and so they got on the meter, and then all of a sudden the measuring point on the meter, the tone arm, started to soar. Well, I mean, went up. It started going up. And I didn't know what to do because I was only a little bit trained and I didn't really know how to handle it. But I just forged ahead, and I started running the processes on her. And my pen ran out of ink. And I put the pen down. I got the other pen. And then I was, and she was going on. It took a long time, and the second pen ran out of ink. I didn't have a pen anymore because I had 2 pens. So I started scratching on the paper, and then I ran out of paper. So I turned the other paper, the other thing around. I started writing on that, and finally the tone arm, which we can get into later, came way down, and she had a win and had a nice release, and I was sweating, believe me. So I brought up the session. I turned it in, and it came back. I thought I was going to get really criticized, and he said, well, we really have an auditor here.
Wow.
It's funny how you mentioned that because I remember that I would always have 2 pens, you know what I mean? Just in case one runs out, and
Right.
You'd have a big stack of paper just in case, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I learned that lesson. I had 4 pens from then on.
And you never know how long the session's going to take.
No.
Like, Trey, how long is the longest session you have given someone?
5 hours with a couple of bathroom breaks. It was a horrible, traumatic incident that somebody went through. It took that long we didn't even finish it in one day. It was so bad. They got so exhausted. You can't really continue if they get that exhausted.
Right.
But it was a woman who'd been abducted and raped and brutalized by somebody, and it had happened like 6-8 months earlier. She'd never been able to sleep since then, and just was a wreck. Somebody that I was auditing asked me if I would audit her, so I said sure. She came over and she said, look, can my friends sit in the room with me? Well, it's a little bit unorthodox, but I said fine. It didn't bother me because she didn't want to be alone with somebody of the male persuasion. Anyway, she was sitting there, and we ran the incident and coming up with details, a lot of misemotion, a lot of pain and upset turned on. And we got to a point where it seemed pretty flat, but she was hungry. She was exhausted. So I said, look, why don't you come back tomorrow? We'll finish it. So she came back the next day. We did another couple hours. And at the end, she had a really nice release. All the pictures and all the upset and everything had disappeared. And she also said, and when you know what, last night too, after the session, I got for the first time in 8 months, I'd gotten able to sleep. And I went, wow, that's a win,
Yeah.
Now Trey, explain to our viewers what you mean by a release, like on something like that. Like you're actually trying to help this person get rid of any emotional, attachment or whatever, or fear or whatever it is that is is stopping them, right? I mean, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get rid of that so that it doesn't bother them as much anymore, right?
That's exactly right. And I could take a minute to explain Dianetics, since that's the basis of everything else that has come along in Scientology. Well, Hubbard was an engineer by training. So he was also very interested in the mind. And, in engineering, you learn not only learn how to engineer things, you learn how to reverse engineer things. So he would always ask the question of, you have a situation, with somebody, how did it get that way? What were the steps leading up to it? And how do you reverse those things? Now, the way the mind works is it's a fairly light thing. It's a light energy. You can call up a thought, you can dismiss a thought. I can ask you a question. How was the traffic on the way over? And you might get a little picture, and then we talk about something else. The picture goes away. So as you go through life, you assimilate things along the way. Even just driving, as a stoplight, you stop. You're always assimilating new information,
Right?
and you know how to navigate things because you have in your mind similarities. You go to a door you've never been to, but you still know what the doorknob is, and you open it that way. So, I mean, that's pretty simple. Now,
Right.
when experience comes at you in a traumatic, painful, confusing, intense way, the mind shuts down, because the mind is, as I said, a delicate mechanism. There's too much energy. So what happens is you record it over here in a separate part of the mind, which Hubbard called the reactive mind. That contains all of the traumatic experiences that you've ever had in your life. And the idea there is, I can't experience this now, but maybe later on I can sort it out. But in the meantime, I want to hold on to it. And the reason why I want to hold on to it, it's important to my survival. It threatened it, but I really don't want to experience it. So you're still creating it, but you're no longer controlling it. So that experience stays in that bushel basket called a reactive mind. Now, eventually, other things come along, same thing happens, and then you have something piled on top of it, and then something else, and then something else. And then eventually the earlier stuff kind of starts to disappear. You forget about it. I mean, not always, because you can go back to an earlier experience, think about it, and sometimes you can get some resolution of it. But there's a lot of it that doesn't ever resolve, because it becomes below your consciousness. And in psychoanalysis, the equivalent of the subconscious mind, but Hubbard called it the reactive mind for technical reasons, because it has a more precise definition. So anyway, so that's how the reactive mind begins. And how it affects people is when they perceive something in the environment that's similar to something over here, it activates this energy. And that energy clouds how you look at the present situation and causes you to have an emotional reaction to it that might be very inappropriate. Like you get much more angry or griefy or apathetic than really is warranted by the experience. So it greatly helps somebody's survival to resolve these earlier experiences. Now, brings up the question of, how do you resolve these things? Well, this is where reverse engineering comes into it. Because if the original problem was you couldn't experience that experience when it happened, the solution is to actually experience that experience in a new unit of time, in a safe, calm, orderly environment where you can go through it, you can look at it, you can talk about it, and eventually you can get a resolution out of it. Whatever you need to learn from that experience, you've gotten that. You no longer need to hold on to it. It gets transferred over here from a reactive incident into just a pure memory. You can remember it. It doesn't obliviate it. You can remember it, But the difference between a reactive picture and a normal picture is you can call up a normal picture and dismiss it. A reactive picture, it's got a life of its own. You're not in control of it. So if you keep thinking about a breakup, you know, you had a breakup with somebody and you're very upset about it. So then every once in a while your mind goes to it. Picture's sitting there. Now you can push it away and there it is again. You can take your attention off it. You can look back and there it is again. It's kind of stuck there. And one of the techniques you can use in Dianetics is just close your eyes and tell me what you're looking at. That's what they're stuck in right there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other techniques, of course, but and you know, it's very interesting to people because Scientology is not based on faith. Hubbard says it's based on hope, and the idea is that if you have a bad experience and you can sit down and in an hour or more or less, you can come to a point where you feel good about it, you feel resolved on it, you don't need to worry about it anymore. And you start to think, if it handled that, maybe it could handle this other thing over here too. So maybe I'll get some more sessions and it'll handle this also that happened. And so you have a hope for the future that some of these things that have been bothering you your whole life, things you've been worried about or reactions that you've had, can be resolved as well. So, you know, back in the original Dianetics book, Hubbard was talking about this lifetime, and he was saying, you know, 25 to 35 hours, you run out accidents, injuries, operation, you run out your birth, which people can run out, your prenatal track, and then you're clear, you're good to go. However, there was more to the story, because back in 1950, when the Dianetics book came out, it was a big bestseller. Now, there was no organization. Hubbard would give talks on the weekends in you know, where he was living. But other than that, there was nothing. But a couple 100,000 people bought the book, and then there ended up being like 150,000 people that just got together with a friend and they read the book and they were running these processes on each other. Mm-hmm. Things started to happen. The first thing is people started to run past lives. They started to run experiences that weren't from this lifetime that also helped to resolve problems that they had in this lifetime. But they could see very clearly they didn't start in this lifetime. They started a long time ago in experiences that they had not previously recalled. And once those were resolved, it also resolved the present time situation. So that was the first thing. Second thing is people started having out-of-body experiences. All of a sudden, they found themselves up in the corner of the room looking at their body. And then they started to know that they had an independent existence, independent of the body, that the body was one thing and they were another thing. As a spiritual being, they could detach. They weren't detached. A lot of times, almost always, you're in the body.
Right. I just want to point out to the viewers that in Scientology, you are the spirit or the Thetan, and you have a body.
Your body's not you. Your body is not you.
You are not the body with a spirit. You are the spirit, and you have the body. You have a body. I just wanted to make sure that's clear so people could understand better what Trey is saying.
Yeah, and also I just wanted to mention too, your explanation of how this auditing, you know, this prior experience and it was having a bad effect on somebody, you move it from a reactive mind over here where it no longer affects you. It's a good example of, like you said, of like you had a bad breakup with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and then the next time you deal with other boyfriends or girlfriends, you're a little apprehensive because of the bad experience you had over here. But if you could actually review and look at that bad experience with an auditor and processing and actually review it and look at it, you come to a realization of something about it. and then that emotional attachment disappears. Like you said, you can still see it, but it doesn't have that same emotional or negative effect on you. And that's basically what you're doing in auditing in that basic Dianetic audit. You're getting rid of that so that you can talk about somebody who died in a car crash and you don't get the same emotional experience because it's been taken care of and you actually feel at cause or in control over it. And one thing I wanted to also mention about auditing, I know you'll agree with this, Trey, is that to our viewers out there, Trey doesn't tell the person he's counseling what to think about what he's looking at. Okay. In other words, there's no evaluation, there's no invalidation. Whatever they say is what they say. Trey is there as the auditor to just guide the person to look at these things and remind them and using different processes and techniques to get them to review and look at things that maybe are occluded or something they don't see. But then when the person has the realization, it could be anything. It just is what's the realization for that person. And they get a tremendous release. And that's what you were talking about earlier, right?
That's very good points. And just to build on that, once Hubbard started getting these reports of out-of-body experiences and past lives, being an engineer, he started asking the reverse question. If a person can detach from the body, how do they get stuck in the body in the first place? If a person can remember a past life, how is it that they've forgotten all of it? And that was a turning point. That led from Dianetics to Scientology, which is a science of the spirit and how the spirit works. And the whole story of a spirit as opposed to simply the body. And a very important point you mentioned about one time somebody said to Hubbard, "Oh, you guys think you have all the answers," and Hubbard said, "Oh, no, we don't have all the answers. You have the answers. We have the questions." I thought that was good. And when I first started doing Dianetic auditing, of course I was trained. I thought I knew everything. So I was thinking, oh, this guy's stuck in a birth engram, Well, that wasn't it at all, And I very quickly learned I had no idea. I had to find out from the person, not going to my own evaluation of it. And that's one of the big differences between auditing and other forms of therapy. In psychology, a person is the way he is because of the things that have happened to him. That the environment, everybody has shaped how they are, and that was free will has little or no importance in that field. In Scientology, a person is the way he is because of what has happened and what the person has decided or how the person has evaluated his experience and what decisions he has made about how to handle that type of thing in the future. So all programming is self-programmed. And in order to reverse engineer that, you have to uncover the self-programming that you have done in the past. And the problem to be resolved in doing that is a lot of this self-programming is buried in painful experiences because that's where you make your most powerful decisions. When I interview somebody, a new person, and I ask them about just tell me a little bit about your life and, tell me about your health, tell me about your profession. And, say, oh, tell me about, any relationships you have. And they go, oh, no, I don't have any relationships. Let's not open that ball of wax, So, well, okay, got some bad experiences there. So you get a clue as to what to really take up in a general way.
Right.
But specifically, you have no idea. You have to ask the person. You find out, and then you learn how to pull the string, get to the bottom of something, and resolve. And there are many different techniques in Scientology, along with Dianetics. And once you've done all the training, you learn. You've got this big tool chest, and somebody tells you the situation, what they're interested in, what they want to look at. and you decide what tool to use, and then the two of you work together to resolve it. And so you're the person getting to look. And the other basic
Right.
about Scientology that I really liked is Hubbard said, when you audit somebody, you're not trying to get them to think, you're trying to get them to look. And you get them to, in a safe space, to look at things that they hadn't looked at before. And that way they can see, when you look, you see. You can see it, something that you hadn't seen before. And that is where you get your realizations from.
Right. Well, and also in Scientology, you have lists, pre-done lists that you can read out to the pre-clear, use the e-meter as to get reads on different things to see what subject is charged, and then you can take up those subjects. Correct?
That's correct. And it's important to understand what charge is. It goes back to these traumatic experiences, like if you've had a very painful experiences, when you make a record of it, you're recording that pain and the emotion as well as the visual. It isn't just pictures. It's a hologram of the experience. Now, that harmful energy is called charge. And that's what reads on the meter. When you hit something, when their attention goes on something that has charge on it, you'll get a reaction. What that means.
Let me show a meter picture so people can you can point out what you're talking about when you say that you can see it, because this is a meter right here, and you're talking about that dial there on the right with the needle, right?
Yeah, the big dial shows you thought reads, and the big dial on the left is just a larger version of the one on the right. And the other ones are different controls that you use sometimes in session. A lot of times you don't use those, but the main thing is the face where you get the needle. And you're going back to this big bushel basket of experiences. Now, the mind has a protective mechanism. It doesn't allow something to even come up that cannot be confronted or looked at. Here's the level of consciousness, and it can go here. It isn't going to go here. When it goes here, it doesn't read. When it goes a little bit below consciousness, it'll read. And that means that is accessible to the person, and they can pull that string and learn something from it. Once you handle that, then you can go another layer. So it all comes off in layers.
Let me explain one other thing too, just so people, because we've got people never been here before. Okay, so this is an actual e-meter, and it's attached to electrodes, which are cans. Like you can see here in this picture, the auditor that is there on the left, the woman, and she's got a meter there, and then the gentleman on the right is actually holding two cans that are hooked up to that meter, and that meter sends a low current of electricity through one can, and then through your body, and then out back to the meter. And it's actually reading the resistance in your body, which you're talking about. You're calling it charge, right? In other words, something that's emotionally there, and it will read on the dial. Isn't that right?
Yes. Well, that's exactly what happens. A lot of people simplistically, they say it's a lie detector. It's really not a lie detector at all. A lie detector measures perspiration and heart rate and things like that. This is just specifically designed not to record those things, but it measures very subtle changes in the resistance to this current. Now, the reason why you get a read is because these traumatic incidents have mass in them. So when they come into your circuit by putting your attention on them, the mass increases and you get a rise in the resistance. When you look
let me give an example for people that are watching. When he's talking about mass, I'm sure we've all experienced, like maybe we were watching an emotional movie or something, and all of a sudden you feel really heavy in your head or in your body or something like that. That would be, something that's mass, that's heavy. And that's what, that's just an example. There's lots of them. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. what mass is frozen energy. It's the frozen version of the experience that you had.
Right.
And because when that energy is frozen, when you look at it, when you put your attention on it, it puts a little bit of energy into that, which activates some of that frozen energy. And that's where you get the reaction on the meter. So that shows that by looking at it, you can get a discharge. If you look at it more and really work it with the process that you're doing, you will eventually get a full discharge, and that's where you get your releases.
Now, Trey, just so people know, the meter is not actually doing anything to the person getting the counseling, right? It's just a tool for you as an auditor. Is that correct?
Right. It helps you determine what is going to be productive to run in a session, so you're not just wandering all over the place. There is a structure to it. You get familiar with the structure, you understand it. It parallels how the mind works.
Right. Just wanted to mention that it doesn't actually do anything to the person getting counseling, but it's a tool. No. It's an aid to you. As a matter of fact, some people can audit without meters. Back in the early days, you didn't have to have one. There were other ways that you could do this sort of thing, but the meter was developed in order to assist the auditor in determining what was going on with the person they were giving the counseling to.
Right. Well, also the way you can use it to assist is you're using that needle on the dial, and every time you run a list or they're talking, you can use that because that needle is going to react, and you say there. Right. What is that?
What are you looking at? What's that?
Right, and that's way they're going deeper and trying to think to see, well, what is it? And then the needle will tell you when you've come up with the item that the pre-clear needs to talk about and get the charge off of. Right, yeah, Trey?
That's right. That's good. Good explanation. It tells you what you can run that'll be productive. It also tells you when you're finished running it.
Right.
Right.
You get a manifestation on the meter that shows you're done. That way you're not just endlessly talking about the same thing all over and over again, like often happens in psychoanalysis. Is you go back to some incident that happened you've been talking about for years that never resolves anyway. Because
Trey, explain to them what happens on the meter when you get a release of that mass.
Well, the needle it goes like this. It gets very loose, and you get this kind of a thing, which means there's nothing interfering with the motion of the needle. It's just a random energy flow. So you're taking fixed energy and you're turning it into a flow, which is, frees you from it.
And it's called a floating needle.
Floating needle, yeah.
Or a free needle, a freely floating.
And then Trey, what has to accompany that floating needle for you to know that it's time to move on?
Well, person feels happy. A lot of times they realize something. They go, oh, you know what? Blah, blah, blah. No, good. That's it. That's all. You have a free needle, and we're going to end off on that.
Yeah. In Scientology terms, you'd have a floating needle. You'd have the person, what they call very good indicators, big smile, and some realization, oh, you know what? I caused that, or I did this, or I did that. Man, I feel so much better. Boom, you're done.
Yeah, exactly. And a session, you start the session, you open up something by looking at it or by finding something. There's many ways of doing that. You work on it, you resolve it, and then you close the session. You never leave the person sitting in an incomplete. If you open it, you close it. The closing is the resolution of it.
And Trey, how do people usually feel at the end of a session? Like, you don't end it if they're not feeling good, right?
Oh, never. No, never. You would, if somebody if the session's really long, this very rarely happens. If the session's very long and they get really hungry, you have to take a break or do it the next day to resolve it. But you never leave the person in the middle of an upset. No.
Right.
Never.
And you want them to be feeling good and their needle floating and very good indicators, right?
99 out of 100 times they boy, I feel really good. I feel like taking a walk and looking at the trees. And
And I can explain that. I've said this before on some of our other shows. It's almost like a feeling of euphoria. I mean, you literally feel, if you really had a big, what they call a win or a big cognition, you could be floating on air. You're feeling so fantastic. Nothing's bothering you, and you're like, just feel free, right? It feels fantastic. And just so people know, this is what attracts people or gets them when they start auditing. They want more, because they want more of this. They like, I want to resolve more of my things because it's making me happy. And this is how people become Scientologists and stick with it. And why, when other things are happening in Scientology and that, they go like, well, this is fantastic. I got to keep doing this,
It actually becomes addictive because it helps you so much. And I remember when I wanted to leave the Sea Org, I had been getting auditing, and I'd found going into session, it was like a crutch for me to get through life, because I hated working with Mark Inber. And so it was like a peaceful time for me to go in session so I could talk about it and get it off. And it was my crutch to get through life. And then when I was wanting to leave, I was like, what am I going to do without a daily session? And that's where I was like, okay, I'm just going to have to depend on myself, rather than an auditor. And that's what I've done ever since. But that auditing really helped me get through some rough times.
Yeah. It changed me as a person, as a teenager. I've talked about this before on our channel. I did my grades when I was in high school, and it completely changed me. We don't need to go into all the details, but I'm not the same person I was then. I'm still me, but I don't have the same hangups. I don't have the same abilities missing. You know what I mean? I can talk to people. I'm not afraid, and things like that. And so that's really what Scientology auditing, what we're talking about here. Listen, Trey, we're reaching here the end, but we want to talk to you more about this, like Janice said. So we're going to definitely want to do another session. Do you feel like, is there anything else you wanted to mention before we end it off about this?
Well, just to expand on the point that Janice made, the person feels very, very winning after a session. Then there's the question of how long does this feeling last? With some people, it lasts 10 minutes. Some people, it lasts a week or even a year. Now, as you do the broader scope of the entire range of processing, you'll find that this period of feeling good expands. This feeling of being in control of your life expands out until you feel like, you can control more and more in your life. And eventually, like when you, at some point in your auditing, you learn how you can pick up a meter and audit yourself, because you become attuned enough to your own mind, and you're aware enough of subtle energy changes in your own mind and the correlation between that and meter reads. You can resolve things yourself when they come up. So you're always handing the reins back to the person you're auditing. You're always auditing a person in the direction of more self-determinism, more power of choice. That's all you're doing. You're giving back to the person the freedom to choose. And
you're helping people, right? You're helping.
Well, yeah. Right? Especially been on staff. When my brother was on staff, he went on staff at the mission, and my mom said years later, she said, "Oh, when we got up, he was gone already, and we went to bed. You could hear him come in an hour later, and he said, I hated that. It's like they're working him too hard, And so then, but later on, she said, but you know what? After he went through that, life itself was a piece of cake to him, because he'd gotten a work ethic in, and he learned how the discipline of completing things, of communication.
Yep.
So that's the function of training. You learn how the discipline of application, and that's what you guys. I mean, you leave the staff and you out confronting life, and so many people that have left staff have done so well afterwards, because they're head and shoulders above the average person in terms of their work ethic, their ability to handle life and to set and meet goals and targets.
Yeah, and this is why we wanted to have you on, because like I said, we had people who had never been in saying, what is Scientology auditing and how does it work? Because we wanted to explain, this is reason why a lot of the people that you see now that are no longer in Scientology they're on their channels and that type of thing. They're very competent and they do very well at what they're doing because they had success with the Scientology processing that we're talking about here. Now, this is different than the sec checking and security checking and that type of thing, and the abuses, because you can also use this to abuse people too, and that's separate. We've talked about that in other shows, but we just wanted to give people a flavor.
Yeah.
And we're going to have you on again to talk more about this, Trey, but just a flavor in terms of what is Scientology auditing and how it works. Okay.
Yeah. And we should also, Mark, in that next interview, we'll discuss the difference of sec checking and auditing.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to mention the whole reinterpretation of the tech that occurred when Hubbard went off the line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because a lot of the people that our viewers watch, they never got any auditing. A lot of the staff never got any of this processing. All they got was sec checking, which is basically looking for crimes and getting you, finding things that you're doing wrong. And, it's very negative, whereas auditing was positive. It was to help you, Yeah. So anyway, we'll get into that in the next show. Anyway,
auditing is 95% what you're doing right and what you could do right.
Right.
5% of what you've done wrong.
Yeah. And there was no punishment after your auditing session. It was punishment in ethics if you were doing something out of ethics and they found out in a security check. You know what I mean? Auditing was supposed to help you and make you feel better.
Well, and I will bring this is a key point that Hubbard used to always bring up. When someone got in ethics trouble, he would call for their PC folder to find where was the out tech that happened for that person to then get in ethics trouble. It wasn't, he found a direct relationship there that when someone was on auditing lines and they got in trouble, that it wasn't for some other, only reason would be there was out tech, something was done wrong.
Yeah.
And we can discuss that further later on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Trey, thanks so much. Hold on, okay? Don't hang up or anything like that. I'm going to do a little business. We're going to end the show, and then we'll talk to you on the other side. So just hold on 1 second. We want to thank everybody for watching. Thank our viewers. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Hit that notification button. Hit that like button. It really helps us out to get more people to watch the show. So we really appreciate that. If you have any questions or comments about what we talked about here, go down below and get in that comment section, and we will answer your questions. If you have questions for Trey, ask them in there, and we will bring them up to him for the next show that we do. So anyway, if we've talked a lot about this, but if you have questions and comments, please go ahead and get in the comment section. If you want to support our channel, you can buy us a coffee. There's a link in the description. Click on that, follow the instructions. It's a way to support our channel, and we greatly appreciate that. And then also I wanted to mention again that we've got our Connection merchandise at our merchandise store we've got a 10% discount now through Christmas. It's connection. It has the word connection and then a heart with 2 arrows pointing to it. And these are gifts that you can send to people that you want to reach out to you that maybe have disconnected from you. But 10% discount on all merchandise at our merchandise store. The promo code is Christmas when you check out, and you'll get that discount. And some people have taken advantage of that since we've announced it. So just wanted to mention that too. Okay, Janice, anything else?
No, that was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to see the comments so we know what questions to ask Trey in the next one.
Well, I very much enjoyed and appreciate spending this time with you and anybody else that's listening.
Great, Trey. Hang on, Trey. Don't hang up. But till next time, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.